All right.
Everybody's ready. I
You're in
hope
the
you have
pre-show.
something like that. Okay. And it was a great article today, Craig, or yesterday, I guess.
Oh, thanks.
Right. Very excellent. I did share it. I did a bunch of sharing today, and we had a impromptu
Twitch has accepted the stream.
protest today because of what the ICE activity in Minnesota, the
YouTube
murder.
has accepted the stream.
Yeah.
And Facebook has accepted the stream. Are you ready to start the show?
Everyone? Good. Okay.
When the timer says on the air, you are on the air.
Okay. Welcome to Talking Peace with the Western New York Peace Center, being recorded here at Think Twice Radio in the home of the future, also the home of our friend and producer, Richard Wicca. Thank you, Richard. We're also grateful, very grateful to our friends at Buffalo State. That's Buffalo's original alternative radio station, WBNY, coming out of Buff State. We are grateful to Greg and all our friends there at Buff State. And when I think of gratitude, I think of the fact that we are on land that was stolen from the Haudenosaunee, in particular, at least here in Buffalo and Western New York, from the Seneca, or as they call themselves, the Onondaga, and that they, like so many other people, formerly enslaved people, and people who've been oppressed in all kinds of ways, or other just people wise enough to know that thankfulness is so important in spite of all the hardships that people suffer through, that certainly the indigenous people start every gathering off with that Thanksgiving address, which acknowledges all the people who made the gathering possible, that thanks Mother Earth for giving us everything we need for a good life here on Earth, that for the living waters, that our water itself is life. Water is life. Mini-Wachoni, for all the wonderful plants and animals and all of the beautiful phenomena around us in the world and in the sky world of Brother Sun, Grandmother Moon, and the sky world, and the Creator, and the love that animates it all. And then they say Yahweh, and the people say Nyo. So Yahweh.
Yahweh.
And thank you. Well, this is an important, and I'm very excited about this show. First of all, I know we've just had such an onslaught of just lawlessness and ever increasing chaos and corruption. It's very, very distressing, but we have two wonderful guests who are right at the forefront of truth telling and making the changes that we're trying to make to get where we need to go here together. So first I want to say we have Medea Benjamin with us. Medea, who is co-founder of Code Pink, still leading in so many ways, so much courage and eloquence. Medea Benjamin, welcome, Medea.
Thanks to be on with you, Vicki.
Oh, we love having you on. It's been a while, but because we've been watching you from afar, but you're still a friend of the show, and God knows we miss having you come visit us here in Buffalo. But you've been too busy everywhere else. But anyway, and then of course we have Craig McIver, also a friend of the show. You've been on quite a bit recently, especially because we're looking at international law and saying help. So Craig McIver, formerly senior human rights official with the UN, who is just an expert on human rights and just a stellar media person. And we're so grateful for your eloquence and your courage. Thank you, Craig, for coming on.
Thank you, Victory. Nice to be with you and Medea.
So we'll do what we like to do is start off with, so our topic is myth busting from Palestine to Venezuela. And so we're going to get into that. But before we get into the thick of it, when we think about myth busting and the international arena, such as it is right now, the goings on, even as we speak, and the illegal occupation of Venezuela, the genocide happening to the Palestinians, attempted genocide. I will say it's not going to work. But when we think of those things, what are the values that we want to promote? What are the values it makes us think of? So if we can just go around on that. So Medea?
Certainly, we want to promote living cooperatively with the world. I find it horrific that the Trump administration has now not only said that the Western Hemisphere is once again its backyard with this Monroe Doctrine, but that the U.S. can use force anywhere in the world. So we want to promote international law, cooperation, diplomacy, and nonviolence, especially at a time when we have over $1 trillion of the people's money going to the military, and Trump now even asking for more while people don't have health care. So health care, not warfare, is certainly the motto of the day.
Thank you so much, Medea. And Craig?
Well, Victor, I think I'm thinking about justice these days more than ever because we're living in a world of impunity. And that impunity has caused a kind of cascade of atrocities over many years now, but certainly over the course of the last 2 years of genocide in Palestine, when we have seen, as it's been called, the first live stream genocide, and a world on its knees, either unwilling or powerless to stop the atrocities of the United States, of the Israeli regime, of their allies across the globe. That's led now to this very baldly imperial grab on Venezuela, the bombing of the country, the murder of dozens of people on the ground, the kidnapping of its president and first lady. People ask, how is this possible in a post-World War II era when there is this thing called international law? And the answer is that we have been building toward a world of absolute impunity, a world without justice in many respects for decades. We saw it in this country with the war on drugs and the mass incarceration that brought. We saw it with the torture and renditions and executions of the so-called war on terrorism. We saw it with the systematic deprivation of the many in order to consolidate wealth and power for the few under the leadership of the U.S. empire. And then culminating in this very public violation of the two cardinal rules of the international legal order, that there shall not be genocide and there shall not be aggression. And yet we're witnessing genocide in Palestine as we speak, and aggression not just in Venezuela, but in countries across Western Asia and Africa and Latin America. So I'm thinking that we will either work together to bring justice, or this world of impunity will not get better, it will get worse, and it will come knocking on all of our doors.
Thank you, Craig. Well, I want to say both of you, both those, the values that both of you have said, for Medea, the being a good global citizen, that caring for other people and being a leader in nonviolence, what we need to be, and in sharing and all those things. And Craig, as you said, for justice and international law. And, I'm so grateful. I think of the values I think of usually, I still think of the same ones. That is, as Dr. King said, unarmed truth and unconditional love will have the final word. And that unarmed truth comes from both of you in your writings, in your social media, in your speaking. Both of you very much are sharing the truth of what's going on, because we're not necessarily hearing it, and we're not hearing it certainly from the lying that's going on in the top of them, obfuscating what's actually going on. And then we're occasionally plainly saying what's going on. Yes, it's the oil, he says. Yes, he says it over and over again, even when people try to give him a good excuse or something that sounds a little bit more palatable. But so truth being the first, it's so important, and love. It's that love, that caring about other people, the people who are suffering, the people who are going to be murdered, people who've already been murdered, the people who are being oppressed, and all of us in danger. All of us in danger. We can talk about some of the domestic stuff going on too, because it's going on even as we speak. All of the state-sponsored violence. So truth and love is so important, and we're so grateful for how beautifully both of you share that truth and love. So that's what we'll do on this show. So we're grateful for both of you. So we've already gotten into it a little bit. And we usually do, once you're talking about the values, that the whole, it's like, the camel, once the nose comes in the tent, the whole thing is coming in. So we've got a lot to talk about here. So let's just start with, well, I'd give you both, leeway to start where you want to as we go around the room about what is currently going on internationally. People know that Maduro was kidnapped, that I think I had heard 80 people were killed. 80 people were killed in Venezuela in this attack. But, all the lies about, that it has to do with drug dealing and everything, but then he says it's for the oil. So there's that, everything that's going on in Palestine with the current, the fact that there's a ceasefire, but what else is going on, and all the things that are supposed to be going on that aren't going on. So Medea, if you would, where are we at?
Oh, well, we're at a terrible time. I think the U.S. Kidnapping of Maduro and his wife are leading us in this terrible spiral downward in Latin America, where the continent, I think, will be rising up against the U.S. intervention and U.S. threats, not only what's happening in Venezuela and the blatant oil grab, but also the threats against Colombia, the terrible strangulation of the Cuban economy, Nicaragua, Brazil, and threats against Mexico. And this is part of the new strategy of this administration that has gone back to revive with a vengeance the Monroe Doctrine, calling it the Donroe Doctrine, which is basically that the U.S. will determine who is in power in Latin America and the Caribbean. And it's going to create horrific problems for people in the region and drag the U.S. into wars in Latin America. So I am very, very upset about what the Trump administration is doing. And then, of course, there's the ongoing support for Israel, which Craig can talk more about from his great vantage point of the international law. And then we also see the blowback that's happening right now in our communities with the ICE agent that just killed a young woman in Minneapolis, and the head of Homeland Security and the president saying that this was a justified act of self-defense, when anybody who's got two eyes can see what happened on the video, that this is a cold-blooded murder. So the chickens are coming home to roost with repression here in the United States, and this is a reflection of the terrible, terrible might make forthright, open policies that this administration is not only putting on paper in their national strategy memorandum, but actually doing in practice.
It's just horrific. It is just mind-blowing that we've gotten to this point this badly, this fast. Craig?
Yeah, and I think it's important as well for us to zoom back and see the interconnections that are occurring here, that these are not just random acts of violence, but they are part and parcel of a worldview and a plan of not just the U.S. empire, but in particular its axis with the Israeli regime. You look at these attacks on Venezuela and you think about, what is motivating the U.S. Obviously, the oil and mineral wealth of Venezuela is front and center in these discussions, but not just in its own right, because Venezuela has always been willing to sell oil to the United States. It's the U.S. that has imposed the restrictions on Venezuela. It's that Venezuela possessing these massive oil reserves while also opposing U.S. hegemony in the Western world, but also supporting Palestine and others who are standing up for their independence and their sovereignty around the world. This is something that could not be tolerated, and particularly as the U.S. empire is turning its gun sights once again toward Iran and gearing up for another war in Iran, they're very much concerned that Iran still has the power to block oil in the Straits of Hormuz, which they need a plan B for, a hedging strategy as it's been called, and that's what that Venezuelan oil represents. If you look at what countries like Venezuela and Iraq and Libya and others have in common that have put them in the crosshairs of Israel and the United States, it is the same. It is that they have oil, that they refuse U.S. hegemony and refuse to bow to the orders of the U.S. empire, and they support the Palestinian struggle for human rights in their homeland, and that is a formula for attack ultimately. You can even bring it to the level of ICE. Remember that ICE, which is this lawless, I've compared them in the past to black shirts and brown shirts, that they're an extension of the ideological project of those in power in the United States now. But these are, quasi-law enforcement agencies. I say quasi because they don't follow the law. They are largely lawless, who take their tactics and training from the Israeli regime, and whose first targets, you will recall, when they were unleashed by the Trump regime on the country, were Palestinians and defenders of Palestinian human rights and those speaking out against the genocide in Palestine who happened to be here on a green card or on student visas. So the interconnections run straight through here. So that means that, as I said before, this climate of impunity, where the Trump administration, the Israeli regime, have violated domestic and international law with absolute impunity over and over again, that kind of impunity feeds on itself. And it creates greater and greater cycles of atrocity in the end. Remember, we've watched for a couple of years now while the U.S.-Israel axis has perpetrated aggression to countries all across Western Asia and Africa, a whole range of 7 or so countries that have been subject to U.S. and Israeli attacks, a chain of assassinations across Western Asia, the targeting of humanitarian boats in the Mediterranean, including the flotillas, transnational terror attacks with booby-trapped pagers, the occupation of Palestine and Lebanon and Syria by these troops, the genocide that's been happening in Palestine. When you look at all of that and you see that the world has been on its knees, and while the people of the world have been standing up against this, the governments of the world and the international institutions of the world have not, and that has sent a message to the U.S.-Israel axis that it can get away with it, whatever it wants to get away with. So when you see this blatant criminality of the U.S. bombing Venezuela, invading the capital, kidnapping the president and the first lady, you shouldn't be surprised, nor should you be surprised when you remember that this is all following brutal unilateral coercive measures imposed by the U.S. to try to starve the population in Venezuela to kicking out their leaders, several coup attempts supported by the United States, Trump's extrajudicial executions of boaters in the Caribbean and in the Eastern Pacific, the pirating of the country's oil tankers, the seizing of their cargo, all of that, because the U.S. got away with it effectively, led then to this violation of the UN Charter, this act of aggression against Venezuela, and its continued planning for further aggression in Latin America, as well as in Iran and across Western Asia. That's how impunity works. If you don't call it, it continues and it gets worse. And that's the era that's being defined now is an era of impunity that brings with it all of the racism and imperialism and fascism and Zionism and genocide of the 20th century, and then arms it with these new technologies of mass surveillance, of silencing dissident voices, and ultimately of murder. So, these things are connected. They are a part of the same project, and we have to be organized in opposing them all if we don't want to live in the world that's being defined by the U.S.-Israel axis as we speak.
Thank you, Craig. Yes, there is just so much to do. I know that today, here in Buffalo, we had an impromptu demonstration in front of the ICE facility, which is at the Delaware North building, downtown Buffalo. ICE has an office in that building. In fact, they even have a cell or two in that building for incarcerating people in there in transit or something. But anyway, they were down there because of the activities in Minnesota, because of just the murder that just happened. It's just back to what you said. There's just this erosion of any semblance of law and order, anything about following the law, that people being, masked with no insignia delineating them as outrageous as it is. I just want to say we're starting a campaign that we're calling Stop U.S. Military Aggression, and with a subtext of no war on Venezuela, which I think we really want to say no occupation of Venezuela and just retrench it all, and but also stop state-sponsored violence. So the state-sponsored violence, which has always been a problem, has become it's just mushrooming into this no holds barred, anything goes chaos that is going on both internationally and domestically with this current administration. So let's go around on that for a minute. Medea?
Well, there's one factor I want to bring in that really is so pertinent to everything we're talking about, and that is how we spend our money as a country at a time when millions of people are being kicked off of health care. You now have, right now, the president of this country asking for a massive $500 million increase in the Pentagon budget. $500 million, $500 billion more. We already have over $1 trillion that we're spending. And then add to that the ICE budget, the budgets that we have for national security that are separate from the Pentagon. And you just see the effects of this, that we have over 800 military bases overseas, that we are spending the people's treasure in more lethal weapons, in more battleships, in more aggression, and taking away from our ability to have a decent life here at home. So I'm just wondering how long the American people will put up with this. And we see in the murder of the young woman in Minneapolis,
Yes.
the outrage that people not only in Minneapolis are feeling, but as you said in your own town, I see happening right now in Washington, D.C. There was a major protest at the ICE headquarters.
Of course.
People are
Mhm.
angry. And
Mhm.
I hope that that anger is something that connects all of these issues and shows that if we don't spend our resources on the well being of our people and we allow this rogue government to continue to violate international law and create misery in so many places around the world, we are in for a major crisis, both at home and abroad, and only a mass uprising will change that.
From your lips to all of our ears, absolutely. And we're working on it. And Craig, and that's such an important point, Medea. I am so grateful for you to bring it up because it's one thing that I keep bringing up about the opportunity cost of all that money. When people, think it doesn't affect them, where they have been thinking, well, it's I work on this or I work on other kinds of justice issues, and they're not as focused on the war making and the military, but they're beginning to understand, and as you say, the more we just that it's even Eisenhower said it is a theft. Every aircraft carrier is a theft from every hungry family. So I mean, it's just the craziness of it. Craig?
No, I think that's right, and I think Medea is right to raise it. I mean, this problem of hyper militarism and hyper militarization in this country is one of the root causes that we have to be always focused upon. I think Martin Luther King Jr. is the one who said that the three evils that we are
Right.
confronting are racism, materialism, by which he meant what we now call neoliberalism, and militarism. And you can see that in everything that's happening now, and the way that so many of the most powerful forces in our society are allied in that project. So, you look at how the media has been covering Venezuela, and you will think that what the U.S. has done is gone and carried out a somewhat controversial law enforcement operation to address some, criminal somewhere, because those corporations are very much invested in this militarized approach to the universe. It's literally a source of income for those media corporations, just as it is for the weapons manufacturers in this country. For Wall Street, you see stocks soaring on the idea of the U.S. stealing the oil that belongs to the Venezuelan people. So the corporations, the corporate media, and you very much have the impression that the powers that be have realized that the U.S. empire is in its final death throes, that its economic promise is highly limited at this stage, that its ability to compete with China and others, that the emergence of a multipolar world that is going to ultimately be a check on the unilateral domination of the world that the U.S. has enjoyed for decades now, leaves them with one advantage, in their view, which is they are heavily armed with advanced weapon systems and technologies that can destroy countries, break things, and kill people. And if that's all you have, it becomes the centerpiece of your approach to the world. This militarization, and by the way, militarization in a nuclear order, is a risk to all of us, not just to the countries that find themselves in the gun sights of the United States, like Venezuela and Palestine and Iran and others. It's a threat to us, not just because of the risk of the spread of armed conflict in a nuclear age, but because it is drawing resources away from human needs in this country as well, from health and education and housing and infrastructure and the things that define a decent life. Economic and social rights of people in this country are all being siphoned into the military-industrial complex, into the weapons manufacturers, into Silicon Valley, into Wall Street, and away from the needs of people in this country. And that's very much a part of the project that they are leading as we speak. So I think Medea's put her finger on an absolutely essential element of all of this.
Absolutely, absolutely. And you also just did when we started talking, and we had talked about that as part of the topic for this show, that the media, and I want to say Craig got our Stellar Media Award 2 years ago, I think, but the media is so not doing their job. When you think about it's just like the war in Iraq. It's the same playbook, the same oil, the same lies being told. There were different lies. This time now it's about the narco terrorism or something, and all the lies that are being told. And then he goes and says, anyway, it's the oil. Yes, we're going to get 50,000 barrels of oil. He even admits that that's what it is. And even any fool can see that all the masquerade around this is about some criminal acts has nothing to do with it. So the misrepresentation of what is going on in the mainstream media is, and the fact that they are just, instead of investigative journalism, they're just parroting the lies being told by the administration as cowards, as the cowards that they are. It's just atrocious. If we can go around about the media, what is going on with the media? As you already started to allude to, the way they do benefit from just going along to get along because of Trump. Anyway, Medea?
Craig, why don't you start here?
Well, I mean, what can we say? The media, by which I mean the media corporations in the United States and in the broader West, have been wholly complicit in all of these crimes. You see it now with Venezuela. Their reporting is completely just stenography for power, as usual. Nobody in the U.S. who relies on Fox News or CBS or NBC or CNN or any of these main outlets, including, I have to say, print outlets like the Washington Post and the New York Times and others, if you rely for your information on those sources, you will have no idea that what has just happened is a massive cluster of crimes under international law. They're using the language of a law enforcement operation, but really what we have just seen in Venezuela is a criminal operation. Under international law, these are crimes for which the perpetrators have to be held to account. The sanctions are criminal under international law. The coup attempts, covert CIA action in the country, the murder of boaters in the Caribbean and in the Pacific. These are extrajudicial executions under international human rights law. The blockade is a violation of international law. The pirating of Venezuelan oil tankers, all violations. And obviously, the bombing and invasion and the subsequent threats of further force, these are explicit crimes and a violation of Article 2.4 of the UN Charter, which is a treaty that binds the action of the United States. It's a part of U.S. law. And needless to say, the abductions of Maduro and Celia Flores, these are violations of international law as well. You add to that the violence that was used in doing it. We've all seen the images of Celia Flores, Maduro's wife, with black and blue and bruised and bound with broken ribs and so on that she suffered in her abduction. The circulation of photos of Maduro bound and with headphones and so on, the kind of perp walking of him. This is a violation of international humanitarian law that prohibits that kind of exposure and humiliation, and yet it's practiced with impunity, and the media has nothing at all to say about this. The U.S. knows that it has no credible legal defense for what it has done in Venezuela and what it is doing in Venezuela, but it also knows that it will not be held accountable by these media corporations, which we have seen for 2 years are willing not only to disseminate propaganda for genocide, but to cover up the realities on the ground, to incite genocide, to disseminate the lies of the Israeli regime, about 40 beheaded babies and a mass rape campaign and all of these other things that never happened, that were propaganda designed to manufacture consent for genocide. The enthusiastic participation of media corporations in this country are actually criminal components of what we're witnessing in places like Iran and Venezuela and Palestine and beyond. And thank goodness for independent media. Thank goodness for social media. Thank goodness for direct information that's being shared among the public in this country and beyond. But the risk here is that, one, there's still a lot of people who rely on those media corporations for their information and their understanding of what's happening in the world. So it remains very, very dangerous. And two, because they have recognized that there are cracks in their wall of propaganda in social media and in independent media, they have begun to crack down on those, either by outright forcing the sale of social media companies like TikTok so they can be taken over by Israeli propagandists or ordinary media like CBS and others, or by using the algorithm to shut down the information, or by persecuting people for their online participation. So they have recognized that there is this hole which is affecting, excuse me, the education of the public, and they're working very hard now to close it. So we've got to double down on our effort to get the truth out before the eyes of the public.
Speaking of which, I want to mention, Craig, your recent article in Mondoweiss, which I'm a subscriber to, and thanks to you. So I think people, if they haven't seen it, they should look up Mondoweiss, or it's on our social media. I did share that article, but you really spell it all out. And so, as you say, we're so grateful for the independent media, for Democracy Now! And other Substacks where people are putting out real investigative journalism, including locally here our Investigative Post, and also all the social media that goes out with the truth in it. And I want to say, Medea, thank you for all that you do, getting it out again and again and again, and confronting the liars right face to face with the lies that they're telling, and asking the questions that clarify just how heinous, just how unjust all of these things are that are going on. So if you would talk about the media too, Medea, please.
Sure. I want to add a few things to the great response of Craig. One is just the normalizing of war, as we saw, for example, during the Iraq time, and now we see during Israel's behavior when they refuse to use the terms like genocide or ethnic cleansing, instead use things like surgical strikes, collateral damage. And then who do we hear from on the corporate media? Unfortunately, we don't hear from the victims. We don't hear from the Palestinians or the Afghans or the Iraqis or the Yemenis. And now in terms of Venezuela, we hear more from the diaspora, from the wealthy Venezuelans who are dancing in the street, and not from the people who have been suffering from the U.S. sanctions and do not want U.S. invasion. And who we do hear from are these warmed over generals, the ones who lied us into the war in Iraq, people still like Elliot Abrams and John Bolton. I'm amazed that they can get on these corporate media shows to talk about U.S. foreign policy when they should be so discredited. And it is so hard for us, and I say us in terms of the real peacemakers, to have a voice on this corporate media. So these are some of the things: erasing the victim, framing U.S. violence legitimate, repeating U.S. official lies, and avoiding legal accountability, all things that we see in the U.S. corporate media. And I must say, I cringe every time I put it on and have a hard time listening, whether we're talking about CNN or Fox News or even MS Now, I guess it's called. I find all of the framing to be really a U.S. first kind of framing, and not taking into account that there are other perspectives and other peoples that we should be hearing from.
Thanks, Medea. Yeah, we do. We need to hear all those voices, and you are very good at amplifying them. And I want to say both of you really do so much towards that. I know that that's one of the things that we're trying to do with this. Our version of this campaign, Stop U.S. Military Aggression, No War on Venezuela, and stop state-sponsored violence, the state-sponsored violence. So I know that there's a big day of action that's been called for on the 17th, January 17th, Saturday, January 17th. We will have here in Buffalo, and both of you are familiar with that in one way and another, have been involved, where we've had, big protest. So we're having a big protest on that day at 3 p.m. It's a little later so that there are plenty of Jewish voices for peace locally. I want to say I consider myself one of them. I'm an interfaith one of them, but I'm very involved at Temple Beth Zion, and let me say I'm a Jewish voice for peace in the synagogue as well. And there are plenty of people who do not agree with what is going on with the Zionism, with the Israeli government, and all the atrocious war crimes that are going on and lies that are being told. So we have that. That's really the kickoff. But from there, there's a walkout, that's been called. That's another national day of action on Tuesday, the 20th at 2 p.m. There's a walkout. They're calling it Free America Walkout. And we'll be in the square for that as well. And meanwhile, we'll be visiting our different various elected officials, Republicans and Democrats. Nobody has done enough. So the Republicans are just wrong. And then the Democrats, well, they voted well. They have on this last War Powers Act, and we hope and trust that they will on this next one. But that's not enough, because there's a lawless, crazy, totally illegal regime, just making a mess all over the world, to a cost that is just outrageous. So if you all want to talk about sort of our next steps, if we can get to that. And again, I'll go back to you're either of you are welcome to answer, really. We use a talking circle just for simplicity's sake. But Medea, if you want to go next.
Well, this was a very short-term focus, and that is about the War Powers Act in Congress that says that the president is not authorized to send the military into Venezuela without congressional authorization. And there will be a vote in the Senate, and hopefully there will be a vote in the House as well. And whether or not we are able to win this by pulling over a couple of more Republicans, it does put these members of Congress on record where they should be, showing whether or not they believe that the U.S. is doing the right thing in Venezuela, and they are willing to abdicate their constitutional role as the only branch of government that can authorize war. So we will see that in the coming days, and perhaps next week as well. We have been working on, I have been focusing a lot on Congress. That's why I came to live in Washington, D.C. And since the beginning of this genocide, I've been in Congress every single week. So
Right.
we look at different issues, whether it's about trying to sanction the violent settlers in the West Bank or pushing to allow the humanitarian aid organizations to function and get the aid in, or whether it's right now, for example, about stopping these attacks on Venezuela. Those are the things that I personally are focused on. But I don't think that this is the be all and end all of what our activism should be. I think it's just one of the many things that we need to be doing. And I really believe that being out on the streets is very important. To see people spontaneously going out on the streets to protest ICE after months of communities coming out to protect their neighbors is a very positive thing to see. Of course, the killing is horrific, but I think it will only fuel people's anger and get more people out on the streets to oppose ICE, to oppose U.S. intervention, and we do have to link it to opposing this huge military budget that is now being called for, a 50% increase. That would take away more of the people's money that is needed for our basic well-being in this country. And the other thing I would say are things like boycott, sanction, and divestment. Groups have been doing this for a long time, way before October 7th, around Israel. But we also need to come up with some creative campaigns around Venezuela right now. For example, there is ExxonMobil, which is the oil company that is at the forefront of this intervention, saying they never got fairly compensated by the Venezuelan government. And I think we can not only have a campaign against ExxonMobil, but look at all the groups that are sponsored by ExxonMobil, from sports groups to women's organizations, all kinds of things, and calling on them to speak out against the actions of this government on behalf of ExxonMobil. So just to sum up, I would say pressuring our elected officials, doing boycotts, divestments, and sanctions, and getting out on the streets and building massive coalitions. And of course, then there are our elections, but I represent a 501c3 nonprofit group, so I can't talk about that, but we certainly need to change the composition of people in Congress.
Right. Right. And we are a 501c3 as well. But I want to say we just have so much work cut out for us, as you point out. And I want to say I have not been to ExxonMobil for so many years that I don't know how I mean, I've boycotted them for so long. But I'm very interested in what you said about some of the other ways that they show up more surreptitiously or other avenues of boycotting them, because they've been a problem from go. This is nothing new. They've been terrible. So and the other thing is that we had up to 10,000 people in the street twice now, on April 5th, and then sometime in the summer we've had at least 7 to 10,000 people out in the street, and we'll be out in the street again. We'll be out in the street again and again and again. And what I feel we're doing is really getting ready to mass mobilize in a scale that we've never had to do before. Craig?
Yeah, one of the reasons that Medea has been a personal hero of mine is the act of heroism that it takes to engage on a daily basis in the halls of Congress with members of Congress on a moral platform. as she does so well. I don't know where the strength comes from to try to do that, because she knows that her interlocutors are not moral people. They're not people who generally factor morality or international law or decency or human rights or peace into the decisions that they are making. Ours is a wholly bought and paid for political system that represents not us, but the interests of power and wealth that are, the source of much of the suffering in this country and beyond. And you see it with the current Venezuela situation as well. I mean, I'm not a 501c, so I can say that the Republicans and Democrats alike in Congress and beyond are disgraceful organizations from a human perspective. The best that most of the Democrats can muster is not to say, the Trump administration is perpetrating massive crimes in Venezuela for which they should be held accountable, for which individuals should be held accountable as well, but only that you should run it by us first. And then I have no doubt that most of them will enthusiastically support the aggression in Venezuela, just as both parties in Congress enthusiastically support the genocide in Palestine and have repeatedly stood up to cheer the indicted perpetrator of extermination wanted by the International Criminal Court in the body of Benjamin Netanyahu. So the pressure on the Congress has to continue. A long-term strategy to get these people out of Congress has to continue. I'm very much engaged with the Green Party in the long term in trying to build an alternative that can challenge the corrupt power of the Democrats and the Republicans. And I hope other people will get engaged in that way as well. But I agree with Medea as well, that what has happened here with Congress, with the administration, with law enforcement, with corporate media, with Wall Street, with all of the centers of power in this country, is they have normalized things that should never be taken as normal. And as I wrote in this piece, if genocide is not a red line, there are no red lines.
Right.
And we should not be surprised when the knock comes on our own door in this country, because that's what these centers of power represent. Yes, War Powers Act, let's try to at least delay these rogue actions of the U.S. Empire. But we need to go much further. We need to dissent at every level against these criminal actions on the part of the government. We need to demonstrate, as you say, in massive ways, much bigger than the small little groupings that we've been able to muster, to send the message that what is happening is not normal, and in the process to educate our sisters and brothers, across the country and across the world on this. We need direct action, which is becoming harder and harder because they have criminalized direct action. They're using now the most brutal fascistic techniques to say that if you take action against their crimes, these are crimes under international law, you will be criminalized, you will be arrested, you will be expelled, deported, fired, thrown in jail, beaten by the police. This is the message of the last 2 years, and yet we need to steel ourselves and to make sure that, with good legal advice, of course, that we are also finding creative means of direct action. We have to denormalize that which they have been working so hard to normalize, and to hold them accountable as well. And that's something that happens, yes, in Washington, but it happens in every city and town across this country, and it happens at home, and it happens in our workplaces, and it happens in places of worship, and it happens in schools and any other forum in which we operate, because we are headed down an extremely dangerous path. In fact, a downward spiral, the end of which I don't like to think about, but it is being expedited now by this current government in Washington. And if we don't put a check on it, the UN isn't coming to save us. The Western world isn't coming to save us. Other governments aren't coming to save us. The courts in this country are not coming to save us either. And so it's all on us. And we will act, or we'll pay the price for generations.
Well, there's so much there. There's so much still to talk about, and we're sort of coming around the bend towards the end of the show. And I'd like to say one thing about the military buildup that's been happening around the Caribbean, or just our 900 bases all over the world. We could talk about, and or as we were just talking about, the way that the immigrants have been the low-hanging fruit. So that's where they're going after them first. Maybe trans people will be next, and that, as people are being picked up, it's the Martin Niemöller story, right? And my dad, being a German Jew who experienced all of that in 33 as a 15-year-old. So if each, just take a minute or two to just comment on those, and also on what we can do, sort of the, as you have been, the things that will give us the courage to do the things that need to be done, and to do them together. Si se puede juntos. We have to do it together. So, Medea.
I want to talk as we wind up in a little bit more of a positive tone. You mentioned the military bases we have. Just this year, there was a vote in Ecuador, a national referendum on whether they would reopen a U.S. military base. And even though there's a conservative government in power now, nearly 60% of the voters said no to reopening a U.S. military base on Ecuadorian soil. That's a positive thing. I also want to say that it is extremely positive that the opinion polls have shown that now the majority of American people, no matter their political bent, are against war. They don't want to be in conflict, whether it's in Ukraine or Gaza or Venezuela. People are sick and tired of our country going to war and using our tax dollars for war. And two other things. One is that I see when I'm in Congress that AIPAC is beginning to lose its power. We've seen a number of members of Congress who are embarrassed to continue taking money from this pro-Israel lobby. And we see some who have taken money from this lobby actually voting against its positions by supporting things like the Block the Bombs legislation to stop sending more bombs to Israel. And the last thing I would say is let's hold on to the sense of excitement with Zohran Mamdani's election, and recognize that he has inspired so many other people around the country to be running for office on a progressive platform that includes pro-Palestine. So we have a couple of positive things to think about and inspire us as we move forward.
Yeah, I hope people see your reel that we shared, that let's see a few more positive things that we can feel good about. And thank you for all that. And you do have so much to do with all of that, I want to say. You really do so much. So thank you, Medea. And Craig?
Yeah, I think Medea's right. People are getting fed up with this militarism. Trump, who campaigned on the idea he wasn't going to get involved in any more wars, he's been in office for 1 year. He has bombed 7 countries. 7 countries in 1 year. Iran, Iraq, Nigeria, Somalia, Syria, obviously many times, Venezuela, Yemen many times, and has threatened a dozen more with military action, all the while weeping that he didn't get the Nobel Peace Prize, which I don't think anyone wants that prize anymore. It's been totally discredited more than once at this stage, what he does. And I think that, there is a slice of the country that is beginning to get it. Despite the role that corporate media plays in trying to encourage militarism and violence and war every opportunity that it has. And I think we should be encouraged by the growing mobilization of ordinary people
Right.
from, by the way, all political stripes, even in this country, that have begun to stand up and say no more of this. But the forces that are aligned against us are also aware of these trends, and they are thoroughly mobilized with all the power and wealth that they have to make sure that we cannot harvest peace from this growing crop of consciousness in society, and they're using that power to seize information sources. Now that they've got a total grasp on corporate media, they've turned their attention to social media, to attacking independent media. So we have to support independent media, all of us. We have to spread independent media to those who aren't aware of these excellent sources. We have to share the truth by all means, even as we resist and dissent against these powers. And for a long term, one thing you have to say about the far right in this country, they have invested in a 50-year project, step by step, in building their power and their narrative in this country, and they are now reaping the horrible benefits of that. We have to do the same thing. We have to create political alternatives. We have to build our own power. We've got to replace the Democratic Party with a party that stands for human rights and justice and peace and climate justice and all of those things that really relate to a decent life, and a foreign policy that is based on those principles rather than on imperialism and conquest and Zionism and war.
Absolutely.
And that's a long-term project, but there's no day like the present to start that.
Well, I'm so grateful to both of you, because you both have everything to do with the fact that those things are going on. Crisis equal to opportunity. This is an opportunity. Inshallah, we will end up in a better place than ever before, just because everything will change with all the chaos and disorder around us. But anyway, I'm so grateful. So grateful to you both. This is Talking Peace, and together we've been talking peace in truth and love. Thank you both so much.